Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Global Mindfulness and Education Summit. Tonight, I'm really excited to introduce you to Dr. Nick Penney. He's coming to us from Auckland, New Zealand, and he has a lot of knowledge and wealth to share with us about how he personally came into mindfulness, and then how he's taken that work and also brought it into schools to help children of different ages and teachers. So welcome, Nick, and thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Helen.
Thanks. So tell us a little bit about how you got introduced to mindfulness and how you decided to make this your life's work, or part of your life's work.
I first got introduced to mindfulness as a way of looking after myself while I was doing my doctoral studies at the University of Queensland in Australia. And I realized trying to work and do a doctoral degree was going to be a highly stressful and time-consuming process. So, unlike a lot of the people that I work with, I realized I needed to carve out time for myself to look after myself. And I had a good friend and mentor who was very interested in broader aspects of meditation and mindfulness in particular. So that brought me to my own personal practice with Don. And then as time went by, I began to realize the potential impact of mindfulness in my clinical work as a pain specialist, and how I might be able to help people overcome the problems that they often have in overcoming chronic pain. So that led me to train in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy with Mark Williams. And then a little while later, as I was thinking about this and I became interested in the Mindfulness in Schools project, came enchanted with the idea that if we could teach these skills and techniques to people before they got into trouble, maybe that might help them not get into so much trouble as life stresses start to pile up.
Yeah, well, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? Yeah, yes. Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
go ahead.
So we know that from in the pain world and also in the mental health world, that the accumulation of negative experiences has a big negative impact on people. We can't necessarily take away the negative experiences, but we can certainly teach people how to respond to them perhaps more skillfully than our natural fight and flight reaction.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that that you've continued learning and that you're bringing it to all these different people, as well as in your clinical work. So, tell us a little bit about your experience with the Mindfulness in Schools project and how you've brought that work to New Zealand.
When I realised that the Mindfulness in Schools project had really got going, I really thought that it was an interesting avenue and skill to be able to have to bring mindfulness to young people. And so, although I'm not a trained classroom teacher myself, I approached them and asked if they would be prepared for me to do the training, and very fortunate to be able to train with Richard Burnett and Chris Cullen some years ago in Boston. And so that was the impetus to really start that. And I had no idea where it was going to lead, but having done the training and come back to New Zealand and talked about it to a number of people, I was invited to a conference of independent schools. And having talked to the conference, one of the head teachers at the conference approached me and said this was really something rather special, and he'd be very interested in talking about introducing it into their school.
Wonderful. Yeah. So how is it, how is just mindfulness in general, is it being widely accepted in New Zealand, or is it still something quite new? And kind of how many schools, or what, are many schools using mindfulness, or is it something unique?
I think that it's the work that I do at that school is reasonably unique in as much as we're now in our 5th year and we teach the program to the boys. It's a junior school, so in New Zealand they move on at 12 or age 12 roundabout. And so in their final year, which is their 8th year in the New Zealand system, in the first term of the year, we teach the entire cohort of students, around 140 boys, the Mindfulness in Schools program. And then I go back at the end of the year, which will happen in a couple of, or a month or so's time now, and refresh it and help them revisit some of the techniques that they've learned. But we've also run programs for parents. And so we've taught parents, parent groups, the lessons in the same week that we've taught the boys, so that it engenders a conversation and a chance to do a little bit of practice at home together. Yeah, and that's really great fun.
Yeah, wonderful. I love when we hear, it's kind of the whole community getting involved, and then there's really a big impact. So what are some of the challenges that you've faced in or that maybe New Zealand as a whole faces in bringing this practice to students?
I think the challenges are probably much the same as they are worldwide. It's pressure on curriculum and time to be able to carve out enough time to do this.
Yeah.
Inevitably, people are pressured, particularly in the independent school sector, to produce results and achievement. And so they look at mindfulness a little bit with, well, if this isn't striving to achieve in a particular way, then why are we spending the time to include it? But, I think as the research has come out and the work of Sonia Luther and others shows very clearly that this, in these high achieving schools and this pressure to achieve, really does bring a lot of challenges and vulnerabilities to the students. Yeah. As far as the state or public systems concerned, there are a growing number of different mindfulness initiatives appearing. But again, my concern is that the powers that be, the education authorities, don't really quite understand the fundamentals of what it is we're trying to do here. Yeah. So there can be a little bit of a box ticking mentality, I think, in some cases.
Yeah. So I think it all takes time and a group of people consistently working and making people aware.
Yeah, and I think Mindfulness in Schools project are, very keen to let people know that this is a slow process, really, and I think it grows organically that way, and maybe that's the best way.
Yeah. And Nick, have you seen any influences from specific news, like the Maori culture or any other historical aspects in New Zealand that kind of already have a mindfulness aspect to them becoming more prevalent?
Absolutely. I don't know about necessarily more prevalent. I think one of the issues for Maori and Pacific people, like every cultural group, is that the pressures of life are separating us from our values.
Yeah.
And mindfulness for me is a really great way of being able to reconnect with those values. So from the Maori perspective, well-being is looked at as both physical health and spiritual health, and family health, but also mental health in terms of the ability to think and communicate and express emotion. So for me, it was very interesting being English and coming to New Zealand that, yes, there are these pillars which sound very familiar, And my experience, sort of anecdotally, both in the schools project and working with patients, is that moving gently towards a mindfulness approach sits quite comfortably with lots of different cultural groups, which is, I think, one of the wonders and powers of it, really.
Beautiful. Yes. Wonderful. So Nick, tell us a little bit more about the work that you do. I'm interested in maybe I know you work with a lot of teenage age group. If children that age sometimes may not be engaged, how can you, or how would you recommend the teachers watching perhaps engage those students that are disengaged?
I think for some it's about finding the thing that will hook them in.
Right. So
MindBE is quite good at suggesting that there are aspects to sport, there are aspects to the arts and music. There is interest in concentration and performance, but we try to downplay that, because then we're buying into this need to achieve and another tool in order to achieve. For me, and the school that I teach in is a boys' school, so we tend to find that sport is the thing that will hook them in. And sport is a very global phenomena these days. So at the beginning of this year, 2019, when we were introducing the boys, I was looking for a particular hook, and it just happened to be the Super Bowl final. Sunday in America, Monday in New Zealand. And so I used the example of Tom Brady, who's a New England Patriots quarterback. And as soon as the boys see somebody who they'd aspire to be like, but who talks very eloquently about his own mindfulness practice and how it's helped him in such a long and successful career, ears tend to prick up a little bit.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that I've found over the years is that the student who looks particularly as though they're completely disengaged and staring at the ceiling or out the window, maybe a lot more engaged than our mind tends to judge them. And I've been surprised how many of those students have come up later and said how much they'd found it useful and helpful.
Wow. Yeah, it's true. We never know, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Other than that, just sometimes the experience of doing a practice and allowing a few wandering eyes to wander around and see that everybody else is sitting there in stillness with their eyes closed, and then almost getting dragged into it because that's what looks like everybody else is doing.
Right. Yeah, I think that those are great ideas, and I love how you brought the interests of the students and the sport and things, because sometimes I think maybe teenagers think it's just sitting quietly, meditating, and that's all there is. But when you, as you say, use it in sports and music and all these different ways with movement and things, I think it does attract them much more.
Yeah, and encouraging them to find out where they might fit it into their life, I think, can be really engaging for them as well. And then getting them to come back and feedback into the class where they found a reason to use a technique, either to get them out of a bad place or find a place of calm and connectedness.
Yeah, and I know you believe, like I do, in a strong personal practice. So how do you encourage, are you working with the teachers as well in the school, or are you working only directly with the students?
No, the class teachers sit in and we encourage them to do the practice, and particularly in the inquiry, the teachers will often just go and sit out in the class, and I'll ask them for their experience, or sometimes they'll volunteer it for themselves. One of the things that I find often with teachers, even if they don't have their own practice or hugely understanding mindfulness, surprising how many of them come back and say, Well, it's interesting. I tried this little practice and I seem to be sleeping.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, people come into it from all different ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
So Nick, what would be one of your favorite practices to share with the students?
One of the practices actually isn't the part of the .B, the Mindfulness in Schools program. It's from Pause-B, which is the offshoot for younger children, 7 to 10-year-olds. And it's the petal practice that we teach small children.
Yeah.
And I find that this is very engaging for people of all ages, because not only are they paying attention to their breath, they're also paying attention to their hand, imagining the petals of a flower opening and closing in rhythm to the breath.
Right.
And not only do I teach this to a lot of kids, I use it myself, and I've taught it to quite a few executives, but in the other way. I get, because you can drop your hand down by the side of your desk in a meeting, so nobody's aware of you doing anything at all.
Right.
Then you can just gently open and close the petals.
Yeah,
Very quiet.
I like that. Yeah.
And it's very
And I think, yeah, people really resonate with those things that they can do when they don't want others to know, or just something that they can ground themselves with very quickly.
Absolutely. And as a go-to practice, actually having this movement, although we'd normally encourage people to be sitting still, I think it allows for a little less mind wandering in challenging situations.
Yeah, very great for exams as well. Yeah. So talking about focus, tell us a little bit more about how you understand focus. And I know we can get distracted very easily these days. We can get hijacked. So tell us a little bit about how you think mindfulness can help us with that.
I often talk to the students who I'm working with this idea that the mind will wander, and we know it'll wander up to 50% of the time. But rather than just saying mind wandering, I use that exact word that you've just used, hijacked. So I said, on one hand, you might notice that your mind has just tiptoed off and wandered off fairly aimlessly, or something more significant, pain, a troubling emotion, or a difficult thought has come along and hijacked the attention. And so this ability to be able to just recognize, concentrate without necessarily thinking, and then be able to bring the focus of our attention back to where we choose it, is just like any skill. It takes practice. But clearly a very important skill, like you say, in these days when there are so many things vying for our attention. I quite like the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, who talks a lot about the mind and the brain being like a deaf scientist living in our head with a megaphone, almost commanding us what we need to pay attention to.
I like that analogy. Yeah, it's such an important skill. I think becoming more and more important, as you said. So, where Nick, do you see the future of mindfulness in education in New Zealand going? What would you like to see happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
One of the things that we're working on is to develop teacher training in the Mindfulness in Schools UK project here in New Zealand. We are a long way from everywhere else, and so being able to offer teacher training, actually build a group of teachers with their own personal practice and their ability to pass it on, I think will be invaluable. And that's gradually what we're working our way towards. My school, King's School down the road here, where I teach the boys, are interested in becoming a hub where we might teach teachers and parents and educators from a broader sense as well. I think that getting it into schools is very important, but it's also very important getting it into universities where the pressure to achieve can be even greater.
Exactly.
Auckland University do run some mindfulness programs, and one of my colleagues there was telling me a little while ago in the medical school of actually having students coming to him in a state of great distress. And when he asked them why, they'd say, I passed, and burst into tears.
Right.
And so you passed. But they said, yes, but I was expecting honours or distinction.
Oh, wow.
And so this, perfectionism starts young, and the self-criticism that goes with it, and that kind of underlying conviction that no matter how hard I try, I'm just never going to quite make the standard that I've set for myself.
Yeah.
I think it obviously starting younger and younger. So the more that we can broaden these skills out to younger people so that they can moderate this, but also thread it. I think threading it through an educational system is vitally important. One touch point is great, but several touch points would be better still.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I that inner critic, I think you're right. It's starting younger and younger, and that if we can bring in that self-compassion and understanding at a young age, then hopefully people won't have to go through that during the older years.
A sense that maybe there's a different way to look at this.
Yeah,
I think for a lot of young people, they're not going to get it, as it were, first off. But sowing seeds, I would say, and I've over the years and seen a number of young people who've come back and got in touch with me after we've taught them the program some years before, saying I've lost my way a little bit. And as soon as you reintroduce them to some of the practices, oh, that's right. Oh, I'd forgotten.
Yeah.
And away they go. So I think the more we grow the mindfulness community quietly and calmly, the more I think people will be attracted to it, particularly when they understand a bit more about what's involved.
Yeah, wonderful. So just before we finish today, Nick, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience today, either what's happening in New Zealand or just your last thoughts to share with us?
I think one of the things in New Zealand is that the government have finally woken up to the crisis in mental health that we pretty much every other country is experiencing.
Yeah.
And they are certainly looking for ways of addressing it. One of the things that I really like about mindfulness, and one of the people whose opinion I expect very much, Sir Anthony Selden in the UK, once said that he thought the role of education was helping the child find the song inside themselves.
Right.
And I love it as an expression, but I think it also teaches us something about mental health, which is that we can't tell people how to fix it. And programs that are just do this and you'll be fine are almost, I think, bound to fail to a degree. Helping people understand their own context, their own spirituality, taking responsibility to a degree for their own well-being, and recognizing that mindfulness is, for me, a key plank, and certainly the science is really starting to show just the protective nature of a practice like mindfulness can have, not only on personal well-being, but potentially on societal well-being as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
thank you. Yes, me too. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for sharing all your wisdom and experiences. If you'd like to find out more information about Nick, we'll have his website, and he has some kindly given us some meditations that he's produced, which will be a link to as well. So thank you for that, and thank you so much for joining us in the summit.
Thank you, Helen. You're welcome.
Thanks.